Hey, Damo.
All right, mate.
How you doing?
I'm good.
You have a good night last night?
Yeah. Me and Will, one of the producers, went and had an Indian just outside Houston. Well, it's a Nepalese. Himalayan. It was a Nepalese, which I think is a good curry, right? Like, you know.
How's your stomach feeling today?
6 out of 10.
Oh, so decent curry then.
Yeah,
decent curry.
it was all right. And it was more the beers as well. Do you know what I mean? And I was sitting there thinking, like, I shouldn't be eating spicy food and beers. We got Martin Wolf on later and I'm just going to be sat here, like, sweating. You might have to like take the reins.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a nice light.
Take the wheel, mate. You drive, which I think is happening in this episode.
I'm doing it right now. Let's do it.
Go for it. What you got?
What I got. Sometimes I get bored, stop watching YouTube basketball videos, and I check out your videos. I watched a recent one on index funds, global index funds, which is a big topic.
Yeah.
Especially for us, you always talk about them, you invest in them. You got me started in them. We actually did a video on how to invest in global index funds, which we will link in the description. So check it out. It's gives you a step-by-step guide. But yeah, it was a decent video. Give it 5 out of 10. Got some tips for you. It was a great video, really funny. Good information in it. What actually inspired you to make the video?
So just before we go into the video and the listener questions, let's just quickly go over why I buy a global index. So I buy a global index because I'm basically betting that the world keeps spinning long term. And that's a really easy thing for me to do, to invest in. It's like the off-the-shelf version of like investing. The global index is like something where it's like, okay, I can just buy the biggest businesses in the world. I can continue to invest into that on a monthly basis. And long term, that's been a sensible thing to do in the past. So this video I did looked at concerns around global index investing. So there's just a lot of articles that I saw circulating around that are basically saying, you know, that the global index funds have a problem. I take this very personally. You know, it's like someone telling me my team is no good or whatever. It just seemed that there was a prevalence of these articles saying that global index funds have an issue and that everyone should be worried and blah, blah, blah. And someone sent me the article going, is this true? And I was like, okay, I'll make a video.
What's the main issue?
It's this argument that you buy a global index fund because you want wide diversification, but actually because of the dominance of a handful of businesses in the global stock market, mainly in America, that you're not getting that, and that really you're overexposed to just a few companies.
You're meant to be diversified by investing in a global fund, but it's like these world funds are mainly like American world funds, like the world is America.
Yeah, and that within them they're mainly like 7 company funds. Like, so you're buying hundreds and hundreds of companies, but actually it's all really going to a handful of businesses. So I think it's a genuine concern, and I think we should always ask ourselves, is what I'm doing the right thing? And, you know, has what's got us here going to continue to get us where we want to go to? So I think that's kind of what we want to explore today. And you asked for some questions, didn't you, or something?
Yeah, I tried to ask listeners, what do you want to know about global index funds?
I asked them. you didn't do squat.
I reposted it on my Instagram story to my 1,500 followers.
Yeah,
Clout.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah,
that's where we got all the responses from me, mate.
I got 190,000, mate. Your rookie numbers.
It's not a pissing contest.
It was a second ago until I whipped out a bigger one.
Let's get started on these list of questions. They'll save me quickly. De torpedo. Oh, pedazo de torpedo. Say that 5 times quickly. Pedazo de torpedo wrote in, is it really low risk than just investing in US tech stocks, which make up the bulk of the global equities anyway, yet deliver far higher returns?
Yeah, so the conclusion of the video that I made was like, there's this like, if we take it from just away from stats and numbers and we just look at it from like a human perspective, this argument that we're reliant on tech and that we've become too reliant on tech is kind of, it ignores the fact that we've been reliant on tech since the day we first sliced some bread or smashed a rock against something, you know? And maybe this is just the most modern iteration. It kind of makes me, I mean, I just think it's maybe a bit silly to say we have tech businesses. I would argue that every business at its heart is a technology business in some way, shape or form. You know, technology gets the goods to them. They use technology to produce and manufacture. They use technology to facilitate sale. It's like we call Google and Apple tech businesses, but then we say that, I don't know, a manufacturing company isn't, when they are, you know, they're using robots to make stuff. But I do think that if we accept this label of technology and we say that that's a specific set of businesses, by going all in on those businesses, it just seems like, why, you know, this is a brave bet.
Yeah.
It would have paid off in the last few decades, but it just seems like, why ignore all the other businesses? And when we go into things like recessionary markets or there's downturns, other businesses tend to do well. Dividend stocks and safer businesses.
Yeah, you said it's quite, in the video, it's quite cyclical. So like there was like the energy boom, and then now it's like the tech time, and then before was like housing or property or something. So like do you think we're reaching the end of this tech cycle, or you think not technology cycle, or this Google stuff, or do you think it'll keep going for a while? I
think what happens is a new technology emerges, replaces the old, and then we stop calling that thing technology and we call it like we call the new thing tech, in the sense of like the automotive industry was a technological revolution, in the sense of it completely changed the world. And maybe one day we'll call Google like a boring thing that isn't tech, and it'll be like this AI kind of thing that's like, everyone's like, oh, holograms, I don't know.
These little robots walking around, give us massages while we're on the podcast.
Yeah, that sounds nice.
Right. Everyone wouldn't mind that.
Yeah, I bet you wouldn't. But, you know, what the question is actually asking is, why wouldn't I just go all in on the businesses that have delivered the returns recently? And what I would say is, maybe 40, 50 years ago, someone was saying, why wouldn't I just go all in on General Motors because they're producing all of the returns? Well, you would have missed out. I just think that people always ask the question of, well, if these guys are driving the returns, why don't I just buy those? But if you ask that question at different times throughout history, you will have seen that it would have, at some point, that would have run dry, that thesis or narrative.
That leads us nicely onto another question from Hengis Bluetooth 7882, who wrote in, any way of having a global fund that specifically excludes the tech sector, or at least the Magnificent Seven? The IT sector is massively overhyped at the moment, reminiscent of my days during the dot-com boom because of AI. For the listeners, do you want to reel off what the Magnificent Seven are?
Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Nvidia, Tesla. Do we say Meta?
Do you say Amazon?
We said Amazon. Do you say Meta?
I don't think you did.
Meta is in Facebook. You get the gist. Yeah, about those, the big tech businesses. But, you know, this whole thing of like it's overhyped, I don't know that it is. You know, I personally wouldn't exclude them from the mix, because they just seem to keep finding new gears.
Yeah.
You know, like,
you got to think about how whether like in your daily life, do you use these things? And like I use Google all the time.
This is a good point.
It's like it's ingrained in my day-to-day life.
And they make money. So like the comparison to the dot-com bubble is that it was overhyped, but people just had domain names like pets.com. There was not even a business there, or there was no revenue meaningful, and they weren't making any money, and people were just launching cash into them because it was like, this the future, bro. Whereas Alphabet and Nvidia and these companies have the revenues, they have cash flow, they generate profit that underpins their values. And whilst they might seem to be, you know, overvalued or undervalued at certain points, whatever, I don't think it's a fair comparison to say that they're like the tech businesses of the past, of the dot-com bubble, where people would just, if you had a good domain, you could raise millions but not have a business.
SCFC _151 said, the S&P 500 has performed well for years and years, but for a 30-year investment, is a global fund safer?
I think safe is a weird word. Like, yeah, someone said in the comments recently, like, I thought it was quite well put, that a global index investment is still an American bet, but you're kind of hedging the downside or limiting the downside, because you're not completely exposed. So if America goes down and you're only in America, you're going to feel that down 100%. Whereas with a global exposure, you're still betting 65p in every pound on the American market. But if America tanks, you've got kind of like protection on the downside because you've got all these other countries in there. You're going to accept a lesser return when America is dominant, like it has been. You know, I'm just pulling figures out the air here, so don't quote me on these. But I think last year it was like over 20 odd percent for the American market, but the global market might have produced 15 to 16%. So that's a big difference. That's a big difference. And that's painful to see that you've not got the full juice out the squeeze. But risky. I mean, you could say that not backing the winner is risky, you know, like in the sense of coming second place or not producing the best returns. What I would say is that having this like view that America will always be dominant, that America will continue to do what it does forever is, in my eyes, risky, or at least doesn't acknowledge the fact that that hasn't always been the case and that times change. So if I'm just buying America, I'm basically saying that I think American dominance will continue. I'm not that confident that that will be the case. If I just buy the UK, it's the same. If I buy individual stocks, I need to be valuing these businesses. All of this stuff is not things that I have time for in my life. What I think I'm good at is sitting here and yapping away. I'm a world-class yapper.
Have a nice little chin wag.
Yeah, I'm a world-class yapper. So, you know, I should focus on that and then park my money in a global index because I believe the world will keep turning. I believe the world will keep delivering value. And I believe long-term that markets trend upwards, you know.
But you invest a little bit in the S&P 500.
No, well, I do through my global index. I don't.
Oh, but you don't directly?
No, there's no point because I get that exposure through the global index. That's risky in my opinion. Yeah. By going, I don't know if America's going to win or the globe, so I'll go 50-50. You're overexposing to America because you're putting more chips on the number. I think a 50-50 approach gets you nearly to like 80% America.
Yeah, because you've got 100% America in the S&P 500, then you've got 65
exactly. So actually by doing that, you go overexposed. I get people in the comments all the time going, you know, why do you want America to fail? Or why do you think America's going to fail? I don't. I want America to win. But I also just have this kind of like belief that the world is more than just America. Maybe it's because I live on a tiny little island that is well above its station, thinks it's a superpower.
And conquered half the world.
Yeah. We didn't. We can't even conquer this like podcast, mate. Like, but you know, what I mean is, maybe it's because I'm not from America that I'd like to believe that the rest of the world has some potential. I mean, there's like parts of Europe that are spitting out businesses that are incredible. Trading 212s from Bulgaria, and they're like, they're doing great. There's like very capable people all over the world. Yeah. You know, and I just, again, it's not really a thesis. It's more of like a belief that it's not, I know that America's set up in a way that helps its markets and that helps companies thrive, but I just think the rest of the world has some potential as well. And I think if you look back over 100 years, it hasn't always been the case that, you know, the country that has been dominant stays dominant. I point to Japan again. You know? I
was actually about to say Japan. I think that they're the next biggest country in the like
there was
global
a point where
index funds.
There was a point when they thought that Japan would overtake America as the most dominant like market, and it did really well. But then it imploded in this like spectacular bubble that's taken like decades to recover. And you know, I think recently Japan has been a good investment, but it was a bad investment for a while, right?
I think they're like 6% of global funds, like global index funds.
What is that? The allocation to Japan?
Like around 6.1%.
Okay, look at this guy. Well, he's done his reading. I
do my research. You know,
you got it written on your hand there, haven't you? That's your only stat.
Stop giving away my secrets, mate.
That's your only stat. It's the only one he's got.
I mean, a lot of technology comes from like Japan, South Korea, Asia, but that's not really reflected in.
Well, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because the size of the economy doesn't reflect the size of the stock market per se. The stock market is not reflective of the GDP of the country. Because if you think about it like this, how many corner shops are there in the UK? You can't buy a slice of them on the stock market. You know, there's thousands, if not millions of businesses that are not represented in the global stock market. The stock market is just really a handful of like massive companies. Even the small companies are big by like, you know, the standards of a corner shop. And the economic output of a country is not reflective necessarily in the stock market, in the same way that India is probably a tiny percentage of the overall stock market, but is a massive economy, you know, if you add up all its parts. So America just is much better at getting businesses to market, big businesses. And I think that's why. So in a way, like the stock market is kind of separate from the economy in a way, you know, like in that sense. Here's the thing, there's only really a few ways you can boost your income. I mean, you could change job, but the other main route is to start building a business or a side project. That's how my YouTube channel began, alongside my day job and delivering Chinese takeaways. If you've started or want to start a side project, then you'll need a website. Now, I like Hostinger because of their AI website builder. It's really easy to use and it's great value for money. You can spin up a website just like that. You just have to describe what you would like your website to look like, and Hostinger's AI generates a professional looking site in seconds. Their AI is really impressive. You can ask it to create things like SEO friendly copy, a logo, and they've got an AI heat map to predict user behavior as well. Hostinger is perfect for side projects, e-commerce brands, or portfolios. You can get a website up and running plus a free domain for £2.99 a month, and if you use the code MAKINGMONEY, you'll get an extra 10% off. That's one word, making money, and there's a link in the description for you.
Next question is from Kingy Graham, who wants to know the solutions to overexposure. So, does an equal weighting ETF beat a market cap ETF?
So we'll just explain what they are first of all. Let's say, just to keep the numbers round, let's say you've got an index fund or ETF that buys 100 businesses, yeah? In an equal weighting, each business would get £1 every time you invested. So they're equally weighted. So it doesn't matter what the size of the business is. Every time you invest, the same amount of money goes into each. With a market weighted or, capitalization weighted index, the size of the business dictates how much they get. And this is what most people buy when they buy an index fund. So in that example of 100 businesses, if one business is 5% of the total value of the index, they get £5 in every 100 that you invest. So this is the case with a global index at the minute. Whenever I put £100 in, even though I'm buying 3,000 businesses, £4 to £5 goes to Apple, £4 to £5 goes to Microsoft. Before you know it, these magnificent seven have got 25% of the cash every single time. So it's this argument of, is it better actually to go, everyone gets the same? I hope that makes sense, first of all. Yeah. So we've done a bit of research here, and I've got some data here that isn't our own. I think it's better to, see what other people have said about this. So the S&P have put together a chart. If we're in video, we'll put it up in the screen so you can see it. That basically tracks equal weighted versus market capitalization weighted. And they showed an equal weight index over the last 20 years has produced 11.48%. Whereas the S&P 500 in its traditional sense, the one that everyone buys, has produced 10.29%. So actually the equal weight has done better than the market or capitalization weighted over 20 years. So, change what you're doing, everyone.
abort mission, change. We were wrong. No, but this is over the last 20 years.
Yeah, look at this guy learning.
That doesn't guarantee over the next 20 years it's going to be the same.
It's not a long time, is it? Really?
Yeah, 20 years is very short time period.
It is a long time, but it's not a long time in the investing sense. And it's not a long time over 40 years plus. I also, in my video, I looked at a study, I think it was from Goldman Sachs, that said that over the same time period, that the returns were pretty much identical, but the drawdowns were bigger, the risk. So within an equally weighted index, you saw more volatility over the time period. It was a wilder ride, if you will.
Yeah, we're trying to limit volatility out here.
Yeah,
we're trying to limit stress anyway.
Oh, I don't mind it. I don't mind a bit of volatility. Yeah. I don't mind it, but if you're going to say that you take a crazier ride to end up at the same place, that doesn't make all that much sense, But it's interesting that the equal weight has outperformed. That isn't what I would necessarily expect.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to change what I do because I just think then I start to sit there thinking, well, should I go back? Is it going to change? And like you pointed out, 20 years is a big time period. It's not forever.
Yeah. So I looked at the S&P 500 iShares equal weighted, and the fees were 0.2%. Whereas for the market cap, it was 0.07%. So
it is significantly more expensive. Yeah. I think the returns would still be better off on that basis, according to the S&P report, in an equal weight. But again, it comes down to this thing of, if you're making these decisions to switch, it's always in the back of your mind of, should I switch back or should I not? I don't want that kind of. I don't need to get the very best return from my investments. I don't need to. I'm not an individual stock picker. I'm not Warren Buffett. My reputation doesn't rely on me getting market beating returns or the very best out of all the possible returns. And no one else knows the return I get. I just need something that outruns inflation, that makes me richer long term, a good place to park my wealth. And I think the biggest thing that impacts my ability to do that long term is chopping and changing and questioning my approach. So that's, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record. I stick with the market weighted. I stick with the approach that's produced that returns long term, because that's what will get me where I need to be. And maybe I'll get 9% pre-inflation, or maybe I'll get 7%, and someone else will be like, well, I got 14, mate. And I'll just be like, well, I don't give a shit. I still did all right. I'm retired. I'm doing okay.
I'm still balling out of control.
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Yeah. Semi-balling.
Semi-balling, no.
Yeah.
I also looked at the MSCI World Equal Weighted Index, and it's only 41% US companies as opposed to like 70% or 65%. So if in the equal weighted, if America does continue to be a superpower, and
you'll get left behind.
Right? So you've also got the risk of missing out on the American returns if they continue to ball out and continue to be a superpower. It's
this any decision that deviates is like you're making a bet.
So one question that came up from a lot of listeners is, how do funds rebalance? For our listeners who might not know, not as knowledgeable as me, could you explain what rebalancing is, how it actually works?
Yeah. So first of all, from an index perspective, the top 500 companies in an index will change all the time. So some will fall out of that and new ones will come in. So they reflect that change of, here's a new business that's entered into the top 500 and we're kicking out this business that hasn't. So they reflect those changes. And also when we're talking about market capitalization weighted, where 3 months ago, Microsoft might have been 5%. So every 5p and every pound goes to them. But now they might be 6% or 4%. So they make those changes. They adjust or rebalance so that the amount of money that goes into each business is proportional to their size. We took a look. I mean, it depends, but MSCI do it every quarter, every 3 months. I think there's like a panel that sit down and look at it. And I remember Merrin Somerset Webb said that there is active management within passive funds because there's people making decisions. I know that like one example you might want to look at is when Tesla was coming up, people were like, should it be put in the S&P 500? I think people were asking the same question recently about MicroStrategy as well, in terms of, should it be included, or is this meteoric rise flash in the pan and it's going to get dumped straight back out the index again? But yeah, I think they reflect the changes every 3 months or every quarter in the main. But if you look at the fact sheet of the index itself, so not necessarily the fund, but you look at the actual index. So when it says this fund tracks this index, if you go and search that index and look at the fact sheet, it'll tell you how often they rebalance or make those changes. An example that I've had recently that doesn't relate to this question, but I'm gonna tell you anyway, because King Yapper, Chief Yapper of Yappington, of Yapsville, yeah. I have like, within my ISA, I have like a small little dividend portfolio. So like it's a portfolio that aims at getting, invest in dividend paying companies, mainly because I like to keep an eye on that approach versus my global approach so that I can comment on it on the channel. I'm not recommending people do that. This is my job. So, I do it. I have 10 businesses within there. And I created like a pie on Trading 212, and I just throw money in every so often and it gets split between them. But over time, some of the businesses do better than the others. And I've seen like certain businesses like Microsoft deliver mad returns in that portfolio. So there's like a rebalance button where you press it and it automatically does it for you. Oh. But the problem with that is you get this temptation to rebalance all the time. And then I've seen that I've just been trimming the winner. I've been like cutting the head off the winner every time. Whereas if I'd have just left it, it would have kept going. Do you know what I mean? So with the global index, it's fine. It all happens automatically. But yeah, this process of rebalancing is putting you back in line with the allocations that you set at the start. And it takes a lot of discipline. So like a 60-40 portfolio would be 60% stocks, 40% bonds. The idea there is at the end of each year, they should take, if their stock portfolio has gone to like 80% now, they should sell a portion and put it back into bonds. Yeah. So I only give that example because I want to highlight to people how rebalancing is kind of hard, because it's this psychological thing of selling what's winning and buying what's not. With a global, that doesn't really apply to a global index. The rebalancing is built in, But yeah, it's a hard thing to do psychologically, and I think it's worth acknowledging. And this is another reason why I don't want a complicated portfolio where I've got to sit down every year and sell parts of it to buy other parts, because that psychology is tough.
So you mentioned earlier that the idea of passive investing is that the global economy will continue to grow. Galia Bed wrote in, long-term index investing is based on the idea that the economy will grow infinitely. Is that correct, and isn't it risky? The World Bank has projected global growth to slow for the third year in a row, from 2.6% last year to 2.4% in 2024. That makes the last half-decade growth the worst growth for 30 years. What happens if the global economy continues to grow slower than, say, it did in the 1900s?
Well, I'm not a global economist. I don't know about you two.
A little bit.
But before we dive into this and have a chat, let's think that at the same time that the global economy slowed down, the stock market, the S&P 500 has had some of its best years on record, you know? So there's a detachment, isn't there, from the stock market performance in the global...
It's not directly correlated.
No. And businesses find a way to grow even though the global economy might not be. But anyway, so I just want to make that distinction of just because the economy is not growing at the rate it was, doesn't mean the stock market hasn't been. We did, like I said, I'm not a global economist, so I don't want to sit here and I know what's going to happen. But we did some research where we looked at things, and people are saying here, developing economies are projected to grow just 3.9%, more than 1 percentage point below the average of previous decades as well. And I guess it's this thing of what happens when all countries are developed? You know, where do we go from there? I think, first of all, there's a lot of countries that are still on the up. And I think as well, as these countries rise, developed markets benefit. So America benefits from a growing middle class in, say, India, because they can sell them iPhones. So I think there's some benefits still to be had there. And I think, you know, do you think there was ever a point where they thought that they'd reached the pinnacle of human creation and existence? Do you think in the Renaissance they thought, you know, we've nailed this now, where there's nothing else to go anywhere?
Yeah, or like the Roman Empire. They're we're amazing. We've got scholars, we've got parties, we've got viaducts.
Vomitoriums.
We've got vomitoriums, we've got gladiators, we've got everything. We've got sex parties. We're set. Society is done. But I mean, even developed countries can still do a lot of improvement.
They can continue to develop.
Yeah, continue to develop. I saw this really cool water bottle that you drink it, then it disappears. I don't know how they figured it out, but it's in a bag, and it's biodegradable bag.
The future is here.
Just dash it, and it's it's grown a tree because it's fertilizer. It's great.
I remember when there was milk in a bag, and in certain countries they still do milk in a bag. Yeah, we tried it, and then we went backwards, and I think the British people were just I ain't taking this milk in a bag. It looked like a water balloon, and we used to buy them at uni, and we live in this block of flats that was 40 stories. Mazzino, remember
Mazzino? Out the window?
Yeah, that and a goon. The goon's a wine.
Oh my God.
You just drop them down the middle of the stairs. There was a house party 20 floors below. I just heard everyone screaming because the red wine goon had just exploded. We were such arseholes, mate, at uni.
Savages.
Yeah, drop a goon of wine. So yeah, with people like me knocking around, mate, the future is bright.
What is a goon of wine?
It's like the bag inside the box.
It's called a goon.
Goon. That's how I've always known it as a goon.
So you learn new things on this podcast, guys. A goon of wine.
Yeah, you could get the goon for because you go around a party with the goon, just with a
little tap on it,
squirt it into people's mouths. So just give everyone a little blast on the goon, and you get the goons for £5 for litres of wine. And when we got drunk, we just used to launch them off the balcony, mate, and watch them just drop 40 floors, and it'd be like a weapon of mass destruction, that thing, because it had exploded, just peppered
everything in red, everything in claret,
frag out, just those good times.
Good times.
Yeah.
To finish off, we have quite a hypothetical question, but one that a lot of people are asking about. Claire wanted to know, what happens if we all became index investors? Great question. Many people seem to agree global index funds are the way to go, me included. My question, as someone who knows very little about economics, is what would happen if everyone invested in global index funds as opposed to country-specific indexes or managed funds, and they just became the standard? How would that affect these investments and the global economy? Speaking as a fan of them. Susanna asked a similar question. Taking the rising trend of passive investing, what would theoretically happen if the majority investors would become passive investors of global funds? Would they hurt market efficiency?
Let's say everyone became a passive investor, like 100% of the market was passive, that would be pretty bad, because then you wouldn't have what's called price discovery, which is this like the valuation of businesses. If we said that you buy into an index fund, a global index like we do at the minute, and 5p in every pound goes to Apple, if that's set and then everyone's passive, that will never change, because they're just going to stay at that size and the money's going to go in. No one's coming along going, actually, they're not worth that. You know, price discovery is really important because it values businesses. It makes them rise and fall. And we need that active component. We need people betting and speculating on which companies are over or undervalued to set the prices. The passive component doesn't do that. It just blindly buys everything and goes along for the ride. So if everyone was passive, it would mean that the index would never change, would it? The top 500 companies would just stay the top 500 and no one could ever get into that list because everyone's just set buying those at those levels. Yeah. Now, this leads for a lot of debate and a lot of articles that are written saying passive investing bubble. Michael Burry is a famous example of someone who points to the bubble of passive investing. And there's a lot of articles that talk about it. There's still a massive component of active, of people that are trying to beat the market, of people pricing businesses. And I don't think that will ever go away because I think it's too alluring. I think people will always try and beat the market. And I do think as well that a lot of the people that write the articles saying that passive investing is this real big problem are people that make a lot of money out of the active side. Question their intentions and their biases of why are they saying that. I think what I think's happened really is that passive investing has allowed Joe Public to participate in the market without getting ripped off. And that in the past it was you were paying an active manager massive amounts of fees to make decisions for you. And now that section of the market has just moved into passive investments, which is a lower cost, easier way to access the fun stuff. But you still got all these active guys pricing and things. People like Sasha, they're valuing businesses and saying when they'll buy and when they won't. And that's producing the valuations that we all need. I don't think everyone needs to be active. I think if everyone was passive, it would be a disaster. But I think there needs to be some balance here and realise that all that's happened is people like me and you are participating passively. There's still loads of shiny towers in London where there's loads of people making active decisions on prices every day.
Nice. Do you know off the top of your head which one's bigger, like the percentage in the market of active versus passive?
I think passive is now bigger than actively managed funds. I think it's swung, but I think active is still bigger than passive across the whole market. Yeah. But let's look. Let's not speculate. 1 second. Typing a P into the search bar is dangerous. I was quick on that time.
Yeah, it was hit that E on Perplexity so quickly, mate. PE, like at the same time.
So we're back. We had a look, and what we found was that in 2019, passive funds overtook active funds in America. So this is the American market. It's only just above 50%, the passive element, and the trend is that that's growing. But this is just in America. Obviously, on a global stage, that could be a lot different. The thing with the American market is it's the most well-tracked, most well-researched. So people often think it's impossible to beat that market. But somewhere like India, you might have a much higher active presence because it might require more skill to kind of identify the companies there. Now, as well as that, we're just talking about funds there.
Yeah.
We're not talking about stock pickers and that whole area of the market of everyone trying to buy individual companies. So I think if you looked at it, not just funds, but the whole market, you'd probably find people are more active than they are passive. You've got like massive wealth funds and, like family estates and things like this where billionaires are looked after by a wealth manager. There's active participation there. So I think it's another one of these like sensational problems that's created by people potentially with an incentive to make you feel like what you're doing is wrong, what you're doing is not complicated enough, and that you need to give them loads of fees so that they can do it for you. And yeah, I do agree that if everything was passive, it wouldn't be a good thing. But I just don't think we're ever going to get there, because there's always going to be guys and girls trying to beat the market, setting the prices.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Making Money podcast. If you want to keep Damo happy and smiling, sign up for the newsletter using the link in the description.
And if you like this episode, then watch this one next, because we're sure you'll love it. And let us know that you got to the end by leaving a little t-shirt emoji in reference to Main's tiny little t-shirt.
And my massive muscles.
Oh yeah, the t-shirts get smaller, you don't get bigger, mate. Wearing your son's t-shirts.